Well, I think anytime you have a security or a product that has a high cash yield and has substantial tax benefits, there's a natural attraction to retail investors. Historically, MLPs have been a retail investor space. Unfortunately, the last 4 years haven't been that friendly to retail investors. We've seen actual distribution cuts, what we call backdoor distribution cuts. We've seen simplification transactions, which were taxable events to retail investors. So it's been a rough 4 years. We at Kayne Anderson do think retail investors will come back. And what's key to them coming back is two things. First of all, having these restructurings behind us, which they largely are. And second of all, to show several quarters of stable and growing distributions. After all, that's what retail investors are there for, are those distributions. We used to say it was a Y plus G business. People focused so much on the G that the Y became at risk. We've got to deliver distributions that people can rely upon. One thing that was clear during the recent downturn is that coverage ratios were too low and leverage ratios were too high. So to the extent that companies aren't paying out as much cash flow to build up their coverage, to reduce their leverage, we think that's a really good thing that both institutional and retail investors want. Now, as I said, this is still a yield product. Distributions are very valuable, and over time, we'd like to see those distributions continue to grow. I think midstream companies have to keep in mind the broader macro going on in the energy space, which is returning capital to shareholders. And we think that both distributions, distribution growth, and buybacks are some of the ways to return capital to shareholders. Well, unfortunately, over the past several years, the downturn has exposed some weaknesses we have in corporate governance at limited partnerships. Clearly, conflicts committees didn't work. So first, what we'd like to see is more independent directors and have those independent directors elected by the unit holders. The second is we'd like to see a greater alignment of interests between shareholders or unit holders and the management teams. Now, what a lot of people think that means is get rid of IDRs. And that's certainly a component to it, but it's not just that. We're spending a lot of time recently focusing on management compensation, making sure that they're compensated based on metrics that are aligned with shareholders. An example, we're not in favor of compensation that rewards absolute growth. We'd rather see growth in distributable cash flow per unit. We'd like to see appropriate leverage ratios as part of that. We'd like to see health and safety as part of that. We'd like to see return on capital invested. All those things align with the desires of the investors with the management compensation. We think that's good governance. A core part of the business at Kayne Anderson over the last 15 years is doing pipe transactions for public companies, and that's still there. But what we've seen increasingly is both private equity firms and infrastructure funds provide capital to the sector. Fortunately, those entities haven't been scarred with some of the things that have happened over the last 4 years. They're focused on the fundamentals for the space, which are very, very good. And as a result, they're able to provide capital at very attractive cost to the midstream companies and MLPs. I've been doing this for a long time, 35 years, and I have two things to emphasize. One is things go in cycles. Yeah, people wanted growth, then they didn't. People wanted super drops, then they didn't. So some of the trends we're seeing right now, they're part of that cycle. High cash flows, highly contracted businesses, paying out high distributions. That's the middle part of the pendulum, and we'll come back to that. The second thing is the model will change. MLPs have been around for 38 years now, and we've been through several iterations. I'm confident that the next generation of MLPs will be structured in ways to solve a lot of the issues that we've seen over the past 4 or 5 years. Bottom line, it's just too good of a structure with no cash taxes and substantial deferrals to keep the structure down. It can be improved, it can be tweaked, it will be improved and tweaked over time. So we think that the space has another 38 years at least.